Selling your dental practice is one of the biggest decisions a dentist will make in their career. I am so thrilled to have with me a transitions expert from DDS Match, a partner and sponsor of Dental Nachos. If you are up, hold on, let's go back a sec. Victoria, how can I shut people off now? I'm going to start that over, Josh. Can you ask Amanda about our doorbell thing? So we did a thing, guys, on Zoom. I don't know if you guys know this. People can enter now, and so if you're talking, it's a little doorbell, but can we turn this off, Victoria? I'm going to start Matt's over again.
I think you would just have to do it when you're not on a meeting.
Gotcha. No one
I
else.
don't think anyone else should be entering, so it should be
Nobody else is coming. Okay, perfect. All right, good. 5, 4, 3, 2. Selling your dental practice is one of the biggest decisions a dentist will make in their career. I am so honored to have an amazing key resource and sponsor of Dental Nachos, a transitions specialist from DDS Match, to share with us today how to make good decisions in buying and selling your dental practice, two of the biggest decisions you will make as a dentist. If you would like to learn more, just text BUY to 215-543-6454 or text SELL to 215-543-6454, and we will be happy to connect you with our transitions expert from DDS Match. So I'd like to welcome Matt Poppert to our show. Matt, tell us a little bit about what you do each day in this dental world to help dentists live their best life.
Hey, Paul, thanks for having me on. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and your followers. But yeah, a day in the life with me is spent primarily on three fronts. I'm spending a lot of time networking with people and getting in front of doctors that are in this very important time of considering transitioning their dental practice. Setting up and meeting with those doctors to have exploratory conversations to fully understand what their goals are, and then putting plans together to help them accomplish those goals. I also spend a good part of my time working with attorneys and CPAs as we're going through this process of transitioning practices with clients, both on the buyer side and the seller side. On the sell side, trying to help them determine a value for their practice or for their real estate, and then on the buy side, helping buyers fully understand the financials and the opportunity that they're looking to possibly transact on. And then thirdly, besides networking with those folks, is also getting out and educating doctors. You know, it is the process of a doctor coming out of dental school and buying a business. They spend 8 years in undergrad, typically in some type of a science, and then they spend 4 years in dental school learning how to be a clinician. Very little business experience or access to business. So we like to get in and just educate them on, what are the things that are important to look at? What does a set of financials look like, and how do you better understand them? And with sellers, we like to do a lot of educating with them, understanding what the market looks like and what type of a process is going to take to get them through that process. So those are really the main things that we do on a day-to-day basis.
Great description. I say the key to success in life is me. And when I say that to my own wife, she rolls her eyes. And I don't mean me as in Paul Goodman. I mean managing expectations. And it really is just like dentists manage their patients' expectations about cost, care, how long things will take. Dentists are on the other side at this time. And one of the things I share with practice brokers is, tell dentists that we're making a treatment plan for your career, just like you make a treatment plan for patients. It's wild to me, Matt, but maybe I shouldn't be surprised, since they cover none of this in dental school. Dentists have a lot of mismanaged expectations as to how long things will take, what kind of price they can get for their practice. But you mentioned something, and I want to bring up my failed dreams now. So I have this basketball here for those just listening. So my goal in life, my dream, Matt, was to play professional basketball in the NBA. And that dream failed miserably, okay? Because when you grow to this size and have this speed, you got to get new dreams. So helping dentists not mess up big decisions is my new dream. But just talk for a minute before we dig into some of your questions about how valuable that team is, whether it's an accountant, attorney, bank, practice management consultant, financial planner. I mean, I want to really bring to life through these amazing podcasts with DDS Match how important having a team is. So just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I don't know if I can overemphasize how important having that team is, because the best way to make a decision is to make an informed decision. And, early on when I first started doing this, just by way of one example, is we would meet with doctors, they would get excited and they would sign a listing agreement, and we'd go through a process and find a buyer and negotiate it out. And we get close to the closing table, and all of a sudden the seller's reaching out to their CPA and their financial advisor, and I'm getting a phone call saying, hey, my CPA and financial advisor said I don't have enough money to retire. I'm going to have to keep working, if I do this. So having just those two people are so critical in this process, because if one of the things you want to know ahead of time is, what is my retirement going to look like? Or if I'm younger and I'm selling to a DSO, what is the future going to look like, as far as how much longer out am I going to have to work, or what type of a nest egg do I need to be able to capture? Yeah. And also with that, if you sell your practice for $1 million, you're not getting $1 million at the closing table, right? And because you got to pay Uncle Sam, you've got to pay CPAs, attorneys, so on and so forth. So all across the board with all those people you mentioned, I cannot overemphasize how important it is to have each and every one of those on your team and planning prior to getting to that point of wanting to
I love that. I mean,
the transition process.
I'm allowed to talk about my own people, the general dentist, because I am a general dentist. And in my experience in this world, Matt, I found that specialists, there was an amazing pediatric dentist that went to one of my Just Find Out How to Sell Your Practice lectures in Philadelphia in 2019. And I don't know if you remember what happened in 2020. Oh yeah, the world shut down, right? But she was prepared and aware, and we sold her practice during the pandemic at a great price, because she had all of her, I will call it for dentists, her x-rays, her perio charting, her photos for her practice together. And I just think you can never start too early preparing for such a big decision. And I appreciate you echoing that statement. If people get just that out of listening to the first 5 minutes, they will go back to their family and say, hey, we got to start putting a plan together. We got to get everybody on the same page when we do this. So we're going to do some fun questions. And they're the topic of a DSO, right? I have dentists come to me, Matt, and they say, there's no way I'm selling to a DSO. And I go, what's a DSO? They go, I got no idea. Don't know what it is, but I've heard people talk about it. So let's start with this. I'm a dentist. I'm working with you. My practice collects $1.3 million a year, has 5 operatories. I'm 56 years old. Do I have to sell to a DSO?
Absolutely not. You don't have to, but there could be a time when it might make sense. And part of what we would want to do is really understand what is that you're trying to accomplish. If you're 54 and you've got enough money in the bank, and your financial planner's telling you, hey, if you get, $1 million for your practice, you can hang it up, then we can certainly take a private buyer and put a private buyer in there without a problem. If you're looking to maybe sell and stay on for a longer period of time and keep working for another 3 to 5 years, and you want to maximize the value, then there may be a play there where it might make sense to do that. But I think the important thing to get across on this topic is, when I go out and talk to dentists, they typically are under the impression that they have to sell to a DSO, that the DSOs are taking over the market, and there's no private or independent buyers out there.
I love this conversation that, just to catch you guys up, I'm talking with DDS transitions specialist, sponsor of Dental Nachos, Matt Poppert, who's sharing with me, Dr. Nacho. That's an official doctor of appetizers. I founded Dentist Job Connect, founded Dental Nachos. I own 2 private practices in New Jersey. What do you think makes dentists think that? When they say, oh, Matt, I have to sell to a DSO, the word on the street is this. I'm just curious, where do you think they're getting that from?
So I think it's somewhat, I think it's propaganda that's put out there by some of the DSOs. I think, the DSOs, when you go to a vendor day at a dental school, like when I go over to Augusta for a vendor day, back in the day, it was Midmark and ADEC and Shine and Patterson that were at those events. And now it's Heartland and Aspen and all these DSOs. And they're telling them, hey, look, you've got all this debt. Banks aren't going to give you money, so on and so forth. And might be my only option, is going to work for a DSO. And on the other side, I think, like I said, there's a lot of propaganda out there that DSOs are taking the market over and the banks aren't lending money and interest rates are too high and there's no independent buyers on the market.
Well,
And the
I like
reality,
this. We're going to deep propaganda it. I don't know if that's a word, but I made it up because I live in this world of both. Me and you and people at DDS Match, we're literally working with both daily, right?
yeah, yep,
DSOs and private practice buyers.
yep.
But I'm excited to see both exist. So when these dentists say to you, do I have to sell to a DSO? And I'm using my example. I collect 1.3 million. I'm 54
Yep.
years old. I have 5 operatories. Walk me through the 2 options, right? You're just having a conversation with me. What's a private
Yeah.
practice sale look like?
Yeah, so the private practice, the valuation that we're going to do is going to essentially be based off the discretionary income of the practice.
Yeah.
If your practice is, a healthy practice running at 60% or so overhead, our assumption is we're probably going to be able to sell that practice for somewhere between 1.1 to possibly 1.2 million or higher, and depending on where you're located and the demand we can create around that. And when you get your money, or at the closing table, you're going to get 100% of that money. Typically, the banks are happy to loan these young docs money. Your transition period is going to be roughly about 6 months, unless you choose that you want to continue to work for the person that buys it, and they want you to continue to work for them, most likely in a part-time capacity, because they're
And
going to
most
have
of the
to.
time, Matt, you're sharing amazing value.
Yep.
But as me, the person who's done the class twos and crowns, most of the time in a situation like this, the expectations of the selling dentist is they're going to be hanging up the handpiece for good within 6 to 12 months, and perhaps staying on in some extremely part-time capacity, maybe doing a specific service. But it's not the transition, and you can correct me if I'm inaccurate, where you're going to stay for 3, 4, 5 years when you're selling to a private practice buyer at 1.3 million.
That's a correct assumption, and that's kind of the difference with the DSO. Is the DSOs today, it's hard to find a deal where you're not sticking around for less than 5 years. They're going to want that type of a commitment, and whatever they give you as a total enterprise value, which is typically going to be higher than what an independent buyer would be able to pay you, or how it would value to an independent buyer. However, the difference there is typically going to be either rolled into equity, back into a joint venture, or back into the holding company, or there's going to be some type of an earnout. So there's a little bit of money that could end up, depending on how that DSO does, it could grow, it could go flat, or there's risk that maybe they don't get that money.
So tell me, this is great value sharing. So now I'm working with you. I'm saying, okay, 1.1 million, and I get to be done in 6 months. That's attractive. But you know what? I'm 54. Maybe I could work those 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Tell me more about that enterprise value. You talked about that 1.1 million. Let's say it has strong SD, seller discretionary earnings. I know we're just talking for the purposes of having a hypothetical situation. All situations should be looked at in detail, just like real treatment planning on patients. But now walk us through this enterprise value plus staying on plus the equity.
Yeah. So in a typical office, we would expect somewhere around 20% EBITDA in the practice. And EBITDA is just a fancy accounting term for earnings before taxes. Interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization.
Look,
So
I
again,
made a whole shirt for it here, Matt. No one can see it from if they're listening. Biceps and EBITDA. That's all I think about. Bicep curls. I'm working on my EBITDA. Yeah. Earnings before interest, taxes. Tell it to us again. Earnings before.
Interest, depreciation. I'm sorry, I can't think today.
Yeah.
It's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization.
Yeah, it's not an easy one. It's not an easy one.
I was in the Marine Corps, and Marine stands for muscles are required, intelligence not essential. So,
but in general, I like what you say when you said basically that's the amount of money you've left over if you paid yourself as an associate to run your practice. Is that pretty much
correct?
Look at it. So
yep.
If I collect, if I'm in that 1.3 million, I'm collecting 800 grand. You say, hey, you can make 30% of that. That's 240. But the practice has 500. Well, now it's 260 over the 1.3 million for probably an EBITDA that is like 18 or 20% with that. Is that an accurate way to look at
it? That's accurate. Yep. And then typically we're seeing multiples of that EBITDA anywhere from 5 up to 7%. In some cases, maybe a little bit higher. If you're in the greater Atlanta area and high demand and room to grow, then sometimes we can see EBITDA multiples creep a little bit higher than that. But typically, I think you could anticipate a total enterprise value of 1.5 to maybe 1.6, just going with rough math off the top of my head. But in that scenario, let's say maybe you get 60% of that cash at the closing table, and then that other 30 to 40% is going to get, like I said, rolled back into some type of an equity scenario. And then when the DSO has a recap or a equity event, is typically when you can capture the earnings on that equity that you've rolled.
And you're sharing such amazing value with my audience. Appreciate it, because it's confusing to even people who do this every day. I work with Rob Montgomery, dental focused attorney. I think you know him. We've done a podcast. You ever see the language inside of these contracts? Just like with dentistry could be confusing to dentists, and what's happening with DSOs can be confusing to people who deal with it daily. But if we're helping this audience, the big decision is, how long do you want to keep practicing after you sell? And if it's under a year, our next question is, are there independent buyers that can buy my practice? If someone's listening to this saying, I want to be done in 12 months, is the DSO sale even realistic to them?
No, they're just, the risk for them is higher, because they need to be able to plug an associate in there to transfer that goodwill. And they typically need a runway, or they want a runway, because that's going to give them a better opportunity to get a higher return on the investment that they're making. So if somebody's saying, I want to be at the beach within 12 months, then typically the independent route is the correct way to go.
And that's why, if we're looking, as we are, to educate and help, start thinking about this earlier, before you're backed up to 4 months from now. I have to move to South Carolina from New Jersey. And it is so nacho nuts to me that people will wait, dentists will wait so long on making these decisions, and they put themselves up against life events that cause them stress. I mean, it's probably an easy question, but have you ever seen that with one of your dentist clients?
Yeah, it happens quite frequently. And, if it's in a major metropolitan area, it can be overcome a little bit easier. But where it really becomes challenging is if they're in a smaller town or in a rural area, because those areas, it can take 18 to 36 months sometime to find a doctor that wants to go to a small town in a rural
And I love this
area.
conversation, because I call myself an equal opportunity kind of annoyer of dentists, right? And I live in Philadelphia, and I love the city. I've sold practices in rural locations, but have you found that many of the selling dentists in rural locations are from the area where they're selling their practice? It's where they grew up. Have you found that?
Either them or their spouse, yes.
Right. And then they're asking a dentist to do something they've never done. They go, oh, why doesn't, and it doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means that if you're from those areas, I think you have to, like you said, starting even earlier is so key, because finding that match is, I actually think it's much more difficult to find a match personally and family wise than it would be financially, for these practices. I'm not sure if you find that in your broker travels.
Yeah. When it comes to rural, it's about timing, and it's about finding that doctor that wants to be in that small town. And like you said, they're typically near from the area. Or we do get, we're seeing here in the Southeast anyway, we get a lot of people from up north and from the West Coast that have been moving down here to the Southeast. And if they want to be rural, then they can be a good match for some of those spots. But yeah, it just takes a long time, and it's a timing issue.
Awesome. You've shared tremendous value with us. We're going to wrap up in about 5 or 6 minutes. Just have a few other things I'd like us to share. I mean, you're doing this daily, Matt, whether it's a buyer, whether it's a seller. Let's go back to this private practice transition. What are either some best practices, some tips? How does the seller know they're getting the right buyer? How does the buyer know that the patients are going to stay? Give our audience just some easy things from your life that in an everyday thing, whether will the team stay with them? How do they have patients stay? How does the seller know it might be the right person for their practice? Anything you can share with the audience about that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And on the sell side, every seller I've ever worked with, or the vast majority of them, they typically care more about the person than they even do the numbers. And it's not to say that they don't want to be fairly compensated for their life's work, but they're typically more concerned about making sure it's the right person coming in. And a lot of it is personality. It's meeting knee to knee. It's not something that can just be done via emails and text messages or even a phone call.
Yeah.
There's a relationship that has to be built between the two of them. Clinically, a lot of doctors, especially if they have an aesthetics practice, they're very much concerned about, do they have the experience to be able to take over a higher, maybe a higher caliper practice than your, and I don't mean to, than just your average, PPO type restorative practice.
Well, I mean, I don't know
And
about you, but I will just share. I love to eat food, and if you're selling a restaurant that made high-end food, the next chef has got to be able to make that high-end food, and it's a fit both ways, right? Because
exactly.
As a dentist, I'll share with
Exactly.
you, it's very stressful to be in an environment where you can't make the food, and the food being the dentistry the way they made it. So I think what you're sharing there is true gold for the audience, because I tell buyers and sellers, I'm sure you do too, can you replicate the procedures of what's being done in that office? Because if they do 30% endo or 20% endo, and you're afraid of a K-file, like I am, I'm very afraid of it. I haven't done a root canal in years. It's not going to be a good fit for you.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that can help a seller feel better is I encourage buyers to maybe bring a case or two that they've worked on. So a doctor can see maybe a picture and an x-ray pre and post, and how did they treatment plan it, and why did they treatment plan it. And I've also had sellers pull cases up that they've done and have a buyer kind of tell the seller what they see and how would they do, what would they treatment plan in this scenario.
That's amazing advice, because what you were doing there as you're making them talk about things that are comfortable to them, right? Because it's fairly, this whole thing, it can be fairly awkward. So when you're asking them, hey, talk about these cases together, I think it really decreases some of the awkwardness, brings up them talking about what they love to do, the dentistry. And I think if anyone listening, that is a great advice. If you're a seller or buyer, document a few cases to be able to share during these meetings.
Yep.
Well, you've shared so much amazing value here. I'm talking Matt Poppert from DDS Match. You're in Georgia, Matt. Anything you'd like to share with our audience? I want to tell our audience, if you're listening to this and you want to connect with Matt, you can text buy to 215-543-6454. You can text sell to 215-543-6454, or you can reach out to us at dentalnachos.com. You've shared amazing value with us, Matt. Anything you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, just we like to say at DDS Match, it all starts with a conversation. Yeah. Whether you're buying a practice or whether you're considering selling, you can't start too early in either scenario. I enjoy talking to D3 and D4 students, dentists that have just gotten out of dental school, to help educate them. And even if you've only owned your practice for a few years, at some point you're going to have to sell that practice. And the earlier you start to prepare, the better that situation is going to end up being. It's going to allow you the control that you want when you're selling your life's work.
I absolutely love it. You just try this with your clients. It's never too early to start treatment planning the biggest decision of your career. Thanks so much, Matt.
Thank you.